Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another of our wonderful evenings. Can I welcome to the stage the wonderful Celia Imrie and Fidelis Morgan.
Hi. How lovely to see a nearly full house. Thank you very much for coming on a Sunday afternoon. I just want to say that since I was a very little girl, I dreamt of coming to Tring. And why? Because I wanted to be a ballet dancer and go to the arts educational, it was then, wasn't it? But I also dreamt of growing up and marrying Rudolf Nureyev. Unfortunately, I was too big and he was too gay, but never mind. Anyway, it's lovely to see you all, and thank you for coming.
Yes, we've got a bit of an adventure on today because we've never done it with pictures before. There we are. I've got this clicky thing that I have to work, which I haven't done that before either, because usually somebody's sitting, I'm so grand, I have somebody else clicking things for me normally. But so today I'm going to be adventurously trying to ask questions, listen to what Celia says, prompt onto the next bit, and clicking, and trying to be funny at the same time, too much. Okay, so Seals,
yes.
We're here to talk about Orphans of the Storm, the new book that I was very lucky to have worked on with you.
Absolutely. Well, very briefly, the story is about Michael and Marcella. It takes place a lot in Nice. They have two children, two little boys, and the two children are kidnapped and taken onto a ship under a false name. The name of the ship is the Titanic, but I won't tell you what happens to that. The story really is about what happens when they land in New York, these two little boys, and nobody knows who they are. So that's very briefly the story.
Yeah. And we're now going to great detail about how we started to work on it and what we discovered, because honestly, between us, Sherlock Holmes is nothing. We have totally turned the story upside down. So we're going to begin, donc, what first gave you the idea?
It was going to Southampton, because actually, I think we both agree that since we were very young, we've both been obsessed with the Titanic, as I've discovered lots of people are all over the world. I was amazed how many people I discovered Los Angeles who were all mad about them, mad about the Titanic. And so we went to an exhibition in Southampton, the old one, and I was very struck by this photograph of these two children. And then I discovered that they came from Nice. And my publishers...
Don't jump onto the next bit.
Okay.
She's about to jump onto the next one.
Okay.
This is the trouble with slides.
I know.
Tell us the story that is put about, and still in all the museums actually, the story as it is written in those museums.
There's a given story that Michael Navratil, the father, had to kidnap his two boys because his wife, Marcella, was a very, very bad mother. So he was going to save them, take them away from her, and go to America, where he would continue to be this very successful tailor with his own shop. That's the given story. And also that he was in the process of divorcing her. But you'll discover that we've turned the whole thing upside down, and it's nearly every fact we found on the given story is the opposite. It's quite extraordinary.
And the story at the time was worldwide. It was all over the newspapers, from New Zealand, Australia, Europe, everywhere.
And this is the New York Times.
The waifs of the Titanic, the orphans of the Titanic, because who are these children?
And you'd be amazed how many people were coming forward and saying, well, I think I'd like to have these two children because they could help me on the farm later on when they grow up. and offering to buy them. I mean, absolutely bizarre.
Yes, the woman who offered to buy them so she could dress them as, because they were French, she could dress them as little French page boys at her Marie Antoinette parties. Now, so why did you choose this to be the next book?
Because, I'm going back now, my publishers like me to have a link of some sort with the books that I've written already. And of course, I remembered then that the two children had come from Nice. So I thought, well, that will link the books that I've already read set in Nice, and
Written.
also, sorry, written. Yes. Well, I read them too, actually, they were rather good. And also Sail Away, which is about a transatlantic voyage. So actually a very neat meeting. Oh, you've put them up?
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
Where's Sail Away? Oh,
yes, if you forget anything, you can turn around and get a hint.
Okay.
And so how did you start work on this then?
Well, the thing is, because I've never written a story that is absolutely based on truth, I knew it had to be accurate. And luckily, I had a friend who was a very, very fine historical researcher and had written 1 or 2 books herself. And her name is Fidelis Morgan. So I invited her to come on board and collaborate with me. And my goodness, I couldn't possibly have done it without her. It's been a terrific adventure. One of the night school classes I went to ages ago was the psychology of criminology. And you'll find out as we go through that that came in useful too, because there was crime involved, actually. And also we had to kind of guess, some of the bits we had to guess how the characters might behave in a given circumstance. And as we went along with the research, we thought, yeah, we were right. They did behave like that, you know, into the mind of a criminal.
Now, how do we know each other? Oh, God, I've gone too far.
We weren't
Sorry, I gave it away there.
A very long time ago, Fidelis and I met on a tour of Hedda Gabler at the Royal Shakespeare Company, directed by Trevor Nunn, with Glenda Jackson playing the lead. And it was a world tour, and it was quite a long time ago. Marvellous cast list, as you can see. And we've been pals ever since, which is quite marvellous.
And what were our jobs?
I was the
As you see, our names aren't on that.
I was the tea girl and in charge of props, and also understudying the great Pam St. Clements, who was playing the maid, because I did maid parts then. Nearly always.
And I was understudying Glenda Jackson and Jenny Linden. Neither of us ever went on. 6 months touring the world, care of the RSC, and we're all lifelong friends. I mean, we still go out to supper with Glenda and Bar and Pam and, you know, Patrick and people. So, you know, we know, I mean, Patrick Stewart and Pam St. Clement were total unknowns at that point. And of course, they're now 2 of the most famous people in the world. Quite funny, really. Anyway, so we did this world tour, and then we had a collision involving a ship.
Yes. Well, one day, one rainy day, discovering that we're both obsessed with the Titanic, there was a marvellous exhibition, I don't know if anybody went to it, at the O2.
And it was 2011.
Yes. And because we're obsessed with ships as well, we thought, well, we'd get on one of those clippers and go down the River Thames to the O2. And there was this great big exhibition.
And by this time, by the way, we'd known each other 36 years. And so we walked into the front hall of the O2.
And there was an enormous wall ahead of us at the very start of the exhibition with every single passenger that was on board the Titanic. And we were looking at the great big wall, studying the names, and turned to each other and said, "Did you know I had relatives on board?"
Did you? So did I!
Mine survived.
So did mine! Mine were
was first
crew.
class. And then we moved to the next room with equally huge wall, this time giving the fate of all the passengers on board. I have a feeling they were in alphabetical order by this time, but I'm not quite sure. So we looked up our relatives to find out what had happened to them and turned to each other and said,
Lifeboat 1. Lifeboat 1?
I mean, what a coincidence. I mean, it's too weird. And we'd never ever talked about it, you see, having known each other all this time. My first class passengers were Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon, Nat.
It's a marvellous name, actually.
Yes.
Cosmo.
And his lady wife, Lady Duff Gordon, who was also known as Lucy, because she was a very famous dress designer and had marvellous customers like Gloria Swanson and many Hollywood starlets. She was a very, very famous.
She did Irene Castle, the first ballroom dancer in silent films.
And Vernon.
Well, Vernon
but not in a dress.
No, Vernon and Irene Castle were these two ballroom dancers who later Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers did a film of their lives.
Yeah.
But she dressed them, and Billy Burke, and Mary Pickford, of course, the most famous. And she invented this sort of, that look.
I think Vernon would have looked very good in that look, as a matter of fact. I bet he was jealous.
And my relative...
Well, yet another, and your relative, yes.
Yeah,
no, I was going to say another bizarre piece of coincidence is because she was so famous, Lucy Duff Gordon, they decided to come on board under a pseudonym.
I think you can wait for that until I've done this.
Okay.
No, only it works better.
All right.
Okay. This is... She jumped ahead. She's always good at doing that. This is my relative, the bloke there with the clod-hopping boots, called Albert Horswell. Now, my baptism certificate, I am called Fidelis Horswell. I changed my name when I came of age to my mother's name, which is Morgan, because that's my father's side. And now, Celia.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, the coincidence is that Lady Duff Gordon and Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon decided to come on board under the name Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? One after the other, these coincidences. Extraordinary.
And here's a picture of them all together on the Carpathia after they all got picked up. But it became a massive scandal, and again, one of these worldwide things. Cosmo Duff Gordon was one of the only passengers to have to go and stand in front of the inquiry because he was accused of paying my lot £5 to row away and not pick up any passengers.
And it was a huge, huge scandal for which they were sort of rebuffed from society for really the rest of his life.
Well, it ruined his life. He went and just lived on a farm
in Scotland.
And,
But I would like to think, in his defence, that perhaps he was trying to help them through the next month, because the minute a ship goes down, the crew lose everything, their job, their uniforms, their way to get back home, everything goes the minute the ship goes down. So actually, to give a fiver towards the... It's not the Titanic, is it? You know, that could have been his a generous gesture to help them through.
Well, most people don't know that when the minute a ship goes down, I don't know if this is still true, but certainly it was true, I suppose unions now, so it wouldn't. But the minute a ship went down then, your pay stopped. You also had to pay back the company for anything like your uniforms that had gone down, your binoculars, anything that you'd borrowed as part of your job, your whistle, you had to pay them money. You were then taken to New York, where you had to pay for your accommodation until you could find a ship that you could pay to get yourself home on.
Or get a job on board, I suppose.
So that actually the crew were in a terrible, terrible situation. So in fact, I think that £5 was probably well-intentioned. Yeah. And I doubly think this because my charming relative sold his cheque to the newspaper, presumably for more than £5, otherwise he could have cashed it, couldn't he? And although Lord, or whatever he is, Sir Cosmo, and Lady Duff Gordon, you know, suffered in society for the rest of their lives for it, my charming relative actually made a career out of it. he went on the circuit, like Gypsy Rose Lee, you know, when she's talking about, I'm going out on the Orpheum circuit. Well, he went out on a similar circuit, doing sort of one-man show. My terror of nights on the Titanic, as the night I almost lost my life. And never had to work again as a sailor. He became a turn talking about the Titanic. So I think, really, in retrospect, we can see who the not so quite nice person was. Sorry, my side. Now, you have another little connection.
I do. I think it's my great grandfather, William Imrie, who was one of the managing directors of the White Star Line, and was great friends with Bruce Esme's father. Not so much Bruce Esme, apparently, who was a bit of a rogue.
But we should also say that the Duff Gordons are on her mum's side.
Yes.
So
and,
the Imrie is the father's side, so double.
Yes. And my uncles and grandfather both all worked on the ships in Glasgow, where my dad was from, and probably might have even sold tickets for the Titanic. Who knows?
Because they were shipping clerks
they were
in the 1911 census
yeah.
of Glasgow. So, my mother's family actually were all stewards at that point doing the transatlantics from Liverpool, so they would have been on things like the other ones, the Cunarders probably. Carpathia kind of thing. Now that's our connection with this whole thing. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the research that we did, mainly together, on how we changed the story as it is published about this couple.
Well, for a start.
So we know it's mainly that it's set in Nice so far.
Yes,
that's a fact.
How it would look in those days. We discovered, actually, that it was Marcella divorcing
You're getting ahead
Michael.
of yourself again. The story's about Marcella Navratil. That's her. That's her after, by the way, after when she's had a few bashes in her life. She's only 21 in that picture, believe it or not.
I get a bit overexcited.
Yes.
She's Italian and dreams of being a singer. And when she gets married to Michael, she's only 17.
And there he is.
There he is.
In his splendour.
Very handsome. I'm not sure about the moustache, but there we are. That was very fashionable then. And he was not the quite successful businessman.
Well, at this point, we came into it thinking he was a very successful businessman who owned this shop in the Rue de France, which was very, very good when she made her move on him. That's how the story goes. So Celia set me off. And you were in Hollywood at the time, filming Better Things. And I thought, now what the first thing I can do is send off for the wedding certificate. So I sent off for that, and it takes about 3 weeks or something to arrive. So while I was waiting for it to arrive, I looked up the marriage acts, because they married, strangely enough, in London. And everyone had always said that they married in London because they didn't have the right paperwork. So I looked up the marriage acts of France, the marriage acts of England, to find that the paperwork they needed was identical. The only differences were that in France, a woman under 22 had to have the physical presence or a sworn legal affidavit from their parent that they gave permission to marry. In London, you needed no such thing. The parent just simply had to turn up like the wicked fairy at that moment. You know, does anyone know? And yes, you can't marry her. You know, you had to have that sort of drama in London. But in France also, you had to have the bans put in the paper every day for 2 weeks. You had to have them put up on all over sort of street corners all over the place, the announcement that it was going to happen. In London, you just had to have it pinned up for 2 consecutive Sundays or something like that outside the venue. So right from the beginning, we thought, well, wait a minute, something's not quite right on this. Get the clicker. So then arrives the certificate. And the books written so far say they'd married in some sort of fancy church in Westminster. Now, we know that they did marry in Westminster, you can see from that, Westminster Registry Office, County of London. But then I looked up Joseph P. Bond and discovered that no way was he a registrar in a church. He was a registrar in Poland Street Registry Office in the middle of Soho, a really seedy little registry office. And their address is put down as 10 Marshall Street. And 10 Marshall Street is about a 2-minute walk from that Poland Street Registry Office.
Also, interestingly, sorry, just to point out that there's 10 years difference between them, which is quite relevant. She's only 17, you see. And,
so she would have been 5 years before she would have been able to get married really, without her mother's approval. Anyway, just by complete fluke, I was bored waiting for Celia to come back. I thought, nothing I can do, drum, what should I do? I know, I'll Google Paul Kuhn, I'll look him up on genealogy as though I'm doing his family tree. Anyway, I looked him up, and the first thing I found was that he owned 10 Marshall Street. And not only that, so I went immediately to the census and found the first 4 names on that. This is all 10 Marshall Street. 10 Marshall Street goes to another page, which I won't bore you with. The first 4 names are him and his 2 children. All the others are boarders. So he, although he was paying tax as a restaurant, it was very clearly a flop house. Not only that, they're all foreign and lots of them are tailors. So you thought, now, obviously, this is some kind of scam place. I then looked him up just on Google, and the first thing that came up, wham bam, Old Bailey, where I'm about to be a juror, by the way, in a couple of weeks. So the Old Bailey, so I looked up the trial, and it was like the Navratil children. It was in newspapers all over the world. It was called a bloody drama, a drame sanglant, it said in the French papers. And it's about a tailor from Nice who's 10 years older than his girlfriend, who's also a tailor from Nice. And he was married. She found out he was married, ran away, came to London. He followed her, got a shotgun, and cornered her in her brother's house and shot at her, blew her face off. And but she luckily enough survived, and they were both taken to St. George's Hospital, now the Lanesborough Hotel. And he was sent down 15 years hard penal servitude or something for it. So, but he was staying with Paul Kuhn, and Paul Kuhn came in as a character witness for him, and he thought, that's too much coincidences. 2 tailors from Nice, and it's only 5 years before, 10 years apart, and they're involved in this great drama, and the same witness has been in charge of them. Now, at this point, when we've found all this excitement, Celia arrives back from, actually I shouldn't put that, spoiling the surprise. Celia arrives back, and we head straight off to Nice. And we know not only have they got married, but the story is that he's divorced her and that she has won custody of the children, which is why he's eloped with them. So
after the finding of the marriage certificate, we thought we'd better find the divorce certificate. So off we went to a place called Cadham in Nice, which is the archives, really, and went to the front desk and asked if we could please have one of the directories, or
we could
one
act
of the
this out.
archives.
I'll be me and you can be her. You be her.
Okay.
This was all in French, by the way, but we're going to do it in English. And Celia's going to put on a French accent. I haven't told her this yet. So we arrived. We'd like to see the divorce proceedings, please, for Marcella Caretto and Michael Navratil.
What date?
We don't know the date.
The number?
The roll number? No, we don't know the roll number.
Impossible.
No, honestly, we're quite prepared to go through every single book. We're very, very patient. We'll sit here page by page. No. Well, could we just get some of the books out?
No.
Just to have a look at?
Impossible. Impossible.
Describe me the book.
So, this fat, this big, the pages are all French. You'll never find it. No, sorry.
Well, then she just walked away and left us. And I said, excuse me, can we just, how many books are we allowed out?
1.
Could we, 1 each?
Okay.
Can we please have December 1911? This is me trying to do maths of when the most likely time is for this to have happened. December 1911 and January 1912.
Eventually, we were given these great big tombs, and in
I mean, they really were that tall
and
that
sort of
wide.
took
that
two
fat.
people to carry them practically.
Yeah.
And then in the quietness of the archives,
Celia took December, I took January.
and
She worked backwards, I worked forwards.
Yeah, and we were very patient, you know, the very, very fragile pages and all the different French writing. And I suppose I'd been there for about 3/4 of an hour, I think. And I suddenly saw the word tailleur, which is French for tailor. And then I looked that way round and saw the name Navratil. And I went, bingo, far too loud in the middle of the library and got quite a lot of dirty looks. But it was the most marvelous thing because actually, without knowing the date or the roll numbers, it could have been a colossal surge that was much quicker than we thought.
But anyway, it turned up so much, it was like a diamond mine.
The point is...
3 pages long. I mean, that's half a page, and then there's 3 pages after that.
But the most important thing is she was divorcing him,
as you'll see.
Not the other way around.
La Dame Caretto, Marianne Marceline, wife of Michael Navratil Taylor, living in Nice, demands to her lawyer so-and-so, and she brought the divorce against him.
And although the given story was that they were very happily married and he was a successful businessman, I'm afraid to say that the reason she was divorcing him was for cruelty. Well, that's no minor reason. He'd called her a fishwife or a woman of the streets, and finally,
in front of customers in the shop.
Yes, and then in front of her children, had thrown a plate at her head. But, you know...
He'd stayed out overnight on Christmas Eve and not come back till the next day, and on New Year's Eve, which is not a good husband, it seems to me.
So I'm afraid all the happy marriage that we'd been given was clearly not.
Yeah, and also there was a bit of framing goes on, because from the date of this, we know when she launched her petition, and his counter petition was after he must have had all the news of what she'd accused him of. And on a date after that, he says he came to her flat and found that was banging on the door for 5 minutes, and a man fully dressed opened up, and that she was lying in bed in her nightgown. Now, I think if you've had 5 minutes to get dressed and you're lying in bed because you've been at it, you get dressed. You don't go. And so it just seems to me that, and we use that for the book because it just seems that that's a frame up.
Yeah,
and the policeman later wouldn't witness that he'd witnessed them in flagrante. Wait a minute. Oh, and then we were looked in the newspapers because she said that she'd, I mean, the newspaper articles say that she had discovered that her children were those children in New York because she'd seen pictures of them in the paper. So I thought, well, let's find that. So we went through the local papers, nothing. Went through the Parisian papers, nothing.
Dare I say you're jumping ahead?
No.
No, because just to fill you in, the thing is that they went onto the Titanic. Michael took the 2 children onto the Titanic under a false name of Louis Hoffman. He drowned. That's why the 2 children ended up in New York and nobody knew who they were. Because that's important. I think we forgot to tell you that
yes,
he drowned.
He'd stolen the passport as well.
Yes.
So he
and also, the thing that I find sort of heartbreaking is that they were flung into the very last lifeboat leaving the Titanic, and they were flung in one just wrapped in a blanket, and one practically naked, but
one was in a shirt,
thrown into the last
lifeboat that made it off.
So it was a miraculous escape for them.
So we then went off looking to find these pictures, couldn't find them, but while looking for the pictures, boom, we found out that he'd been declared bankrupt. So that's sometime after he's dead, actually, but he was declared bankrupt on the 23rd. That's there, you can see it over that corner. Faillite, that means bankruptcy. So we then we went back to this little charming woman and asked whether we could see
no happier to see us, by the way.
Yes, it's coming back when we'd sort of gone, yay, we found it. But to find the bankruptcy papers, and my goodness, what they turned up. I mean, we found 3 lots, and then we found the sale of goods that happened afterwards, and we went through all of those.
And the poor people that he owed money to. I mean, you know, from
we've got pictures later. Okay. So anyway, we got the original. That's the original folder. His bankruptcy was not wound up till 1919. The war had come in between, but also he'd never been declared dead because he'd been washed up as Louis Hoffman, and they refused to accept that anyone called Navratil had got on the ship. So he was never declared dead. So he was just called of no fixed abode. But however, by the end of he was summoned to appear. I mean, this little document changes everything of the story. He was summoned to come before the court on the 10th of April. The 10th of April is the day he boarded the Titanic. But he was supposed to be on the 10th of April, turning up in front of a Nice court to explain why he owed 31,661 francs.
And on the 8th of April is when he escaped.
Is when he took the children.
From Nice, knowing that 2 days later he would have had to.
And if he hadn't turned up, the police would have been knocking on his door to get him.
He had to get away.
But we then found this other bit of paper, which is Alice Backwis, was this woman, you can see the word Navratil there. She was his landlady, and that she'd rented him the flat, and the contract for the flat, the shop, the contract was 6 months after he married Marcella. So Marcella can't have been after him for the shop because she didn't have a shop. And he was probably pushed by her rather, towards getting a shop, because it just is after they're wed. But also the rental of a really posh shop, which I wonder if we got the picture. Yeah, that's it. It's on the corner there. It's 3 doors, actually. In fact, it's like 2 cafes. That was the tailoring shop. Was 1,200 francs a year, and he owed 31,000. Now, if you know what the price of a rental of a shop is in a posh city, that was one of the poshest cities in the world at the time, what a lot of money! No wonder he was on the run. Now, the receiver, this is a letter that's often been dismissed. The receiver wrote to Halifax, where his body had washed up, and said, "Did you accidentally find 30,000 francs in his pocket?" Which they didn't, and they just thought, oh, he's mad. He's just making up these figures out of nowhere. But once we found that bankruptcy film, we thought, well, it's the same, isn't it? 31 and 30 is sort of as near as damn it. Anyway, so the book is different from other books on the Titanic.
And one reason is because it's taken from a second-class passenger, which Navratil and the 2 boys were in, which actually I think looks rather cosy and lovely.
Me too, I'd go in that.
Because mostly it's the very, very posh first-class passengers that you see dancing around on films or in other books, or either the Irish jigging down below us. But even books, big fold-out books, if you look up, honestly, finding second-class details of the Titanic was the hardest thing. Yeah. Because there's so much about first class, so much about third class, nothing about the second. You couldn't find out what their social rooms were or what the state of the refectory sort of thing was. This is, by the way, the brochure picture, second class. Also, it's interesting that they've got the mother and the child on the brochure, because actually Michael Navratil would have been very noticeable to be in charge of these tiny children. One was 2, one was 3.5, and noticeable with no mother or nanny or anybody with him. So he was commented upon, also because he showed them off in very, very adorable, tightly tailored outfits to show off his work. And thought that would go down very well in America, which I'm sure it probably would have done. But he was noticeable in that respect, although he tried to, I imagine, keep his head down. Had to.
Now, the book is very serious, obviously, because it's about such terrible things as this, a couple going, getting together, then getting divorced, and then the husband running off with the children. Oh, the other thing, by the way, we forgot to say, was that that everyone said that she'd got custody and that's why he'd stolen the children. What that proved was no, those children were actually taken into care while they finalized the divorce, which never got finalized. She inherited the children simply because she was the only one left, but it was still to be decided who would get custody. And he would never have got custody with the bankruptcy against him.
And it was Easter, which was lucky for him actually, because the shops and police perhaps wouldn't have been so alert. They spent Easter Sunday with the mother, because, you know, parents were allowed to have alternate days for a weekend. So Easter Sunday was with the mother and the two little children, and Easter Monday was when he took them and escaped.
And now another character.
She didn't know where they were, poor Marcella. She had no idea where they were. It must have been utter misery for her.
Another character which breaks up the rather dour proceedings of all of that stuff is Margaret Hays, the sweet New York socialite who was also on the ship and who took care of the kids in New York when nobody knew who they were. She was a millionaire's daughter, but not. One thing I discovered when I went up to Belfast, where they have the nomadic, they have the actual ship, which was the tender that took them out from Cherbourg, because it was the harbour wasn't big enough for the Titanic to get into. So this little tender took them all out. And there on that boat, I discovered that in fact, first class was also divided, and that there was like first class club class, first class pleb class. And little Margaret Hays wasn't quite in the rich list enough. So although, you know, we hear about the Astors and the Strausses and the Weideners and all these people who were multi-millionaires, the most famous and richest people in the world, Margaret Hays was just rich. Anyway, so the first class version in Celia's book is not so fanciful, rich people. It's not the ones that they normally talk about. Additional fun was to be had when we found these photographs of her traveling companions. This was her school friend Olive, and that was Olive's mother, and they had invited Margaret Hays for a fun trip around Europe.
Not such fun with her on board.
But anyway, so the light relief is very, very funny.
She's my favourite character, actually.
And now, what was your favourite moment in doing the research, Seals?
Well, because I love the feeling of something real. And actually, it was back at Cadham, we opened one of the books where all these poor people who had so much money owing to them, you know, little tiny shops in Nice, who he never paid for the ribbons, and by this time there was a bill of £2,000 he'd never paid them, or a Parisian fabric shop he'd never paid. So it was in that big file that I opened up at one page, and Louis Hoffman's business card fell out. I don't know why, but there was something so marvelous about knowing that I was touching a real thing. And of course, that was the name that Michael Navratil took to disguise himself.
He'd stolen his passport, and then Louis Hoffman, whose address we then discovered was Paris. He had a shop. That Chaussée d'Antin is still one of the most chicest roads in Paris. It's just behind Galerie Lafayette and the Opera. It's right in the centre of town. So his tailoring shop was absolutely the chicest thing. He came down to Nice where his mother lived, and he bought all the stuff after Navratil had died, and it was all put up for sale on the Bankruptcy. But Seal was very, very moved by that. I was more moved by this letter where we discovered that Stefan Kozak, who we haven't talked about, who is a boy who worked in the shop, had been in league with Navratil to hide all the stuff. So the minute Navratil knew he was going to be bankrupt, and he said, "I'm skipping the country, love, but we can get together later. But what I need you to do is take everything valuable out of the shop and hide it in the flat above." And this is where the receiver noticed that Kozak, who was getting sued by Alice Backwist, the same woman who rented the shop to them, for the flat above, she was suing Stefan for back rent, and he said, "No, Stefan is a man of straw, a prétendant. for Michael Navratil, and he's trying to defraud the thing. And that, to me, because we'd already decided Stefan was a real creep, written him as a creep, and then we found this letter and thought he is a creep.
And also we found telegrams in code, because Michael's origins were Hungarian, and they telegraphed each other in code. Something really interesting I was going to say there.
No, well, it comes out of this file. Seal came back again from another job somewhere, and I just arrived in at sort of 7 o'clock at night, and there at her computer. This is at Nice, and I'm there at her computer, and I said, "Do you want to see what I've just discovered?" And she said, "Oh no, do we have to do work now? Can't I just have supper?" And I said, "Well, just one page." So she said yes. Anyway, 3 hours later, she's still at it. But this was the first page, and this is the report in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which was forensic. It was the first time ever that an authority had made such a detailed list of the contents of pockets and of people in order to try and identify all the victims that were washed up. And they were bringing in sort of 100 a day on these ships, and they were all laid out in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And this one, clothing, grey greatcoat, I think that says, with green lining and brown suit. Effects, pocketbook, 1 gold watch and chain. I can't read it from here.
Pipe in case.
Oh yes, pipe in case. Receipt from Thomas Cook.
Keys.
Ticket.
Letter to his mother. And last thing, gun.
Revolver. Loaded.
And I remembered what I was going to say, because he did have quite a criminal mind, Michael, because the journey that he took was really quite complicated. He bought the tickets in Monte Carlo, first of all, in the Thomas Cook, but then he could have gone to Cherbourg, to board the Titanic.
Which is where all the French passengers got on, and where lots of the millionaires got on.
Yes,
and Margaret Hays got on.
Yes, but he didn't, you see. He went on a train from Nice to Calais.
To London, to Paris.
To Paris. Paris to Calais. Then got a ship from Calais to Dover. Dover to London. Stayed in the Charing Cross Hotel with the 2 boys.
She got the receipt of that room.
Yeah, Charing Cross
room
Hotel.
121 or something. 126.
And then from Charing Cross to Waterloo Station to Southampton to board the Titanic. So it was quite a complicated journey, hoping all the time that he wasn't going to get found out or, discovered on board, which hence the false name. So and I'm remembering because of the loaded gun. That's
and on
quite
further pages of this file from Halifax, Nova Scotia, they said they found a telegram to Stephen. So Etienne is French for Stefan, and Stefan's German. So they used the English and the French version, and he sent a telegram in coded Hungarian to Stefan, which it must be that's got to be Stefan Etienne, and also a letter to his mother saying, "Please, can you take the children?"
Because he probably
he'd already got bored with them.
He'd probably never had them on his own for such a long time. And of course, on the train journeys or on the ship journeys, you can imagine them all being sick all over the place. So it was tough, and he wasn't used to it at all.
Now, we're just going to have a few quick, fun, silly questions before we go on to Q&A from people.
Yes.
When, let's hope, this is made into a TV or a film, it really would make the most marvellous series, or film, actually. It's so atmospheric. What would you feel to be perfect casting for the principal roles?
For me?
Yeah.
For them.
Roles.
Oh, yes. I only ever think about myself.
We actors.
Well, of course.
Me.
Yes. In the old days, of course, I'd love to have played Marcella, of course, because poor darling, what a hell of a time she had. I mean, any mother in this audience would know what torture it must have been for over about 6 weeks, I should think, not knowing at all where they were or whether they were still alive. But my choice would be a young Natalie Wood. And for Michael, I thought Robert Downey Jr. He's a bit of a dish, and I think Michael thought he was. And for Margaret Hays, Reese Witherspoon. That was my
That would be
casting.
marvellous.
And yours?
Well, I'd have Oliver Reed, young Oliver Reed as him, because he's got that sort of brutal horribleness, but very, very handsome when he was young. And, I'm not quite sure, actually. I'd have someone a bit camp, of sort of young Lucille Ball as Margaret Hays, but maybe not quite so broad as that. But and what part would you like to play then, Celia?
I'd like to play. We haven't mentioned her, unfortunately, but her name is Therese Maguy, and she is the aunt we discovered who she offered herself to the judges, and she was allowed to have custody of the children while the divorce was being sorted out, because neither parent was given custody, so it had to be somebody, a relative. And she remains to be, well, they talk about her being like a lioness, because she's no fool in the story, but a wonderful, wonderful friend when she needed to be,
and she did have successful tailoring shops all over Nice for many years. And I'd like to play Margaret Hays' mother, the hysteric.
Yes.
Wonderful part. God, I'd be so good. She sort of stands at the top of the stairs saying, "When are those children going? I'm packing my case," slamming off and trying to get taxis to leave. I'd love to play that part. Anyway, I'm going to put some pretty pictures on of Nice. Oh no, these are the ones. God, they're in the wrong order. But these are the poor people
paid,
who never got their bills. 2,253 owed on ribbons.
Alone.
Ribbons.
He never
And
paid.
the next one, and that's another lace shop asking for its money. But the folder was absolutely that fat, full of these letters saying, no, he owes me 600, he owes me one. The smallest was 46. And there we are. There's one of the streets, Old Town in Nice. In fact, where the bloody drama girl lived, the girl who got shot.
Who was also
London.
a tailor, and
her father's tailor shop was up that road.
So we're throwing it open to you
yeah.
now, really, to any questions you might have. We can go through some pictures of Nice while you're thinking. Yes.
If you could just wait for the microphone.
So was the mother reunited with the children eventually?
Thank God.
Oh, you've got to read the book. Seal, don't give it away. Spoiler alert.
Well,
might be, might not.
How long did it take you to do all the research to actually write the book?
well, Fidelis was in charge of all the research, but I'd say, I suppose, about 2 years, the whole thing, all told.
But we couldn't let it go.
No.
We went, even after we delivered it, we
afterwards.
were looking up things, and we found out something, the most annoying thing, once they'd printed it. Because I was just thinking something about Hoffman. I thought, oh God, I must look up blah, blah, blah Hoffman on the newspaper archive. And up came this thing where it said Marcella Navratil, but there'd been a big ink blot all over the word Navratil, so it had never got indexed. And it was saying how Michael Navratil had emptied her bank account before he left, and he'd taken 8,000 of her own, every penny she had. He had taken her family money as well, which is not in the book, because we only found out about it afterwards.
So you can
we
see
couldn't let go.
how it's completely the opposite to what we'd been given, or what most people believe.
People still go on television programs about the Titanic saying, oh, I think when he got to Chicago, he was going to bring up those children really nicely, and he was going to have a really successful business. And you think, yeah, like the one in Nice.
I don't know how we're going to get you up there, but shout if you've got a question.
Any question?
Yes, another question. Have you got any of your random people on the...
The virtual crowd are being very quiet.
Oh.
I'd have sent them a note.
Apparently people on the computer can ask questions.
They
Too
can.
adventurous.
Just thinking about Marcella when she was young, do you think she sort of was a total victim, or did she somehow allow things to happen to her which perhaps she could have sort of seen her way through?
Well, I mean, I imagine, because it makes a much better story, that they were very, very happy at the beginning. You know, the 10 years difference is possibly unusual in those days, I'm not sure, but anyway, they got married without her mother knowing. But nobody could have predicted what he did. So in that
I think
way,
it ties in with your psychology of criminology, because
I know, but I'm just
everything you know about Navratil, everything we discovered about Navratil, he was clear. I mean, the photograph says it all. Narcissist.
yeah.
You know, the most famous destructive type of man, which you read about these people in the papers all the time. You know, oh, my wife left me and had an affair, so I had to kill her because nobody else could have her, that kind of thing, that he obviously was taken very much with that. And if he couldn't get his own way, he had to wreck everything.
She was very resilient, though, and, you know, it was extraordinary. When the second little boy was born, he made her work, you know, in the shop all day, all night. So he was very unkind. It all went wrong after the second baby was born, as far as I know, and I think that's a bit of a syndrome as well. So in that respect, I think she was a victim, because you couldn't possibly have known what could have happened. But nevertheless, she was extremely brave and had quite a fight on her hands to make sure that people believed that she really was the mother. But even on that journey, which would have taken nearly a week, because the White Star thankfully got her over to New York.
You're giving the story away. Spoiler alert.
Anyway.
Sorry, folks.
Sorry.
Sorry.
But no, in the divorce proceedings, she said he was jealous the moment she had children, of the time she spent with the children.
But I think,
and there are men like that as well. I did an adaptation some years back of Samuel Richardson's Pamela, and Pamela actually has a great big battle with her husband, who's a posh squire, who says, "How dare you breastfeed your children? Those breasts belong to me." And that's in the 18th century. And I think that kind of mentality, you know, it's just, again, it's a known psychology, and clearly from the divorce, the pages that you didn't see, there were enough episodes of that kind of thing, weren't there?
But I just suddenly thought, not that much of a victim to be brave enough to walk up those stairs of the courtroom and proceed with a divorce, which in those days was unusual. Not completely, but aged, by this time, 20, yes, age 20. She
and
brought
not
the divorce proceedings.
So lords and ladies divorced because they were
which
rich.
I thought was not victim, but brave, really brave.
And I suppose once you get a plate thrown at your head, some people would then just cry and wait until a wardrobe is thrown at you the next time and be dead, you know. But actually she was big enough to get out.
Yeah.
So whilst I was waiting, you've answered a couple of my questions, which was how old was the mother when all this happened, and how long into the marriage when they had the children? Were the children before the marriage or after the marriage?
Oh, no, after.
After,
yes.
You know, they married, they had a child, it was like 9 months.
11 months.
Yeah, after
11 months after.
Was it? Yes. So, and then the other one was pretty soon after that.
Yes.
Year after that, so.
But she was only 19 when wasn't she? 19, no, 18 really.
Yeah, 18 for the
When the
first,
first
and
boy was born.
almost 20 or just on the verge of
Yeah.
20 for the second.
Yeah.
So she was very young to have had such a sort of enormous thing happen.
I've got a question from Mandy. With such a busy acting career and schedule, how do you find time to write? What is the process to writing in terms of the pair of you working together?
Well, the great gift actually in this whole proceedings was to be in Nice, because you know, what a marvelous horizon to look out each morning.
What is that?
I don't really have a particular method. Mornings are much better really to get on with it because it's just so beautiful, and also marvelous bars in Nice where you can go and have a drink afterwards, you know, after 6 of course, naturally. But you know, again, a bit like the Hoffman business letter card, I love to walk down the streets that they walked. You know, and old Nice has hardly changed at all. It's the most marvelous place, actually. I think you saw one of the Saint Vincent, the first little alleyway you saw. And so to be there and to sort of smell what they would have smelt and see and be on the beach where they would have been. Makes a huge difference, actually. And also the great thing is that the pair of us, by chance, were in lockdown when we were able to do all the notes, which is a bit laborious, but could be checked up on.
Yeah, we did all the rewrites and all of that while in lockdown in France, which is a great place to be locked down, actually.
Yeah. Mm.
Now, there's no remote mic to go all the way upstairs, so if you want to shout your question out, I'll then relay it over this.
Yes.
So did Marcella have a family in Nice or any family?
Yeah. No, her mother and father...
stepfather.
Yes, her mother had moved with her, Marcella, when she was quite young, to Nice, and then the stepfather was in evidence too, and then the aunt, Therese Maguire, was an aunt.
And her cousin, Rosa Bruno.
Yes,
who,
there were quite a few.
Who actually does pop up quite majorly in the story, because she happened to be in America at the same time, and there's a further coincidence, which is, again, spoiler alert, so I won't
like the Italians.
A coincidence almost as good as ours, really. But also, the Marcella's very early family history was equally as dramatic. Her father, they were Italians, obviously. Italy has always had this great connection with Argentina, and they, you know, in those days it was like the Irish going to Boston or Chicago. The Italians went down to Buenos Aires, and she was born in Buenos Aires, where her father, who was an ebonist, which, as you saw, Michael Navratil's father on that wedding certificate was a carpenter. Now, there are three types of carpenter in France. There's a carpenter is the bottom one, they bang planks. Then there's a sort of cabinet maker, and then there's the ebonist, which is like Linley. You know, they do inlay and very fancy stuff. Marcella's father was one of them, and he wanted to go up the Amazon to get rare woods so that he could have different colors for his marquetry than anyone else. And while going up the Amazon, he caught yellow fever. He died, Marcella's brothers died, and Marcella, aged 2, was left there with her distraught mother, and they came home on an enormous transatlantic journey when she was 2. So amazing sort of dramatic beginning, and then the mother lost, I think, 5 or 6 children in between, kept on trying to have children right up to the fact after Marcella had children. She was still trying to have replacements for this precious boy who had died.
There's one question over here, and then there's another one up there.
Sure.
That's our last bit.
I just wondered, were you able to find out what happened to the boys later in life?
Yes, I mean, it's all in the back of the book, actually, and I have a feeling the youngest son died first.
He did.
In the war.
No, he'd been very badly affected by the war.
Yeah.
He'd been injured and things, and he never quite recovered and died, 6 years after the war.
Yes, and the eldest
other one went
boy,
on to become a professor of philosophy,
and
was he was the oldest living male survivor of the Titanic up till he died, obviously, along with that woman who was Melvina Dean, who was the oldest woman.
Quite recently, actually. I mean, I can't remember the date, but not that long ago.
There's one more question from the young lad up there.
So obviously the research for this book took you to Nice, but do you have a connection with Nice for your other books to be set there?
Yes, I do. Am I looking in the right direction? Because
Yes.
the light's right at me.
Right into the lights.
He's right under the light.
Oh, okay,
Sorry.
okay. Yes, I went to Nice one day and fell in love with the place, went out to buy a baguette and came back with a flat. And it is
She really did that.
It is my paradise, actually.
And it was she'd asked to see 3 flats. I was down there to do a literary festival, and they'd said you can bring a free guest. And I said, do you fancy a trip to Nice? And she said, why not? So we went down there, and we were there 2 nights or something. Then I had to go up to do Paris, a literary festival. So we were there, and on the second day we were bored, and I said, what do you fancy doing? And she said, well, let's go and have a look at some flats. So we were walking down the promenade. And so I said, well, look, there's an estate agent that only does flats that is for sale on the promenade. She said, let's go there. So we went and had a look at 3. And because, you know, I come from a sort of Liverpool Irish family, and we're sort of always looking at the plug holes and checking that you're not going to have, you know, ceiling falling down and looking for cracks and all that. Celia lives from a dreamland. So she just went into every flat, went straight out onto the balcony and just looked out at that. And I said, Celia, you're meant to look at the flat, you're not just meant to look at the view. And she said, I know. And then we went back to this little estate agent. We sat down on these very, very low, I seem to remember, sofas. And they said, so what did you think? And she said, I'll buy the first one. And I was sitting there next to her and thought, oh, Jesus Christ, does she know that this is like, oh dear, I'm in church, aren't I? Does she know that French law is like Scottish law? You know, that if you say, I'm going to buy it, you've bought it. And they said, just sign this bit of paper. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I can't say, Celia, don't sign! Because I'll be undermining her. So I just sat there sort of going, I don't know what I must have been doing. Rick to smile. And she signed. And I thought, bloody hell, she's bought this flat. And she doesn't know.
But
anyway,
that has
6
been
weeks later, there we are. She got
that
the
has
key.
been my inspiration for all the books, actually.
And it was quite funny the day she got the key as well, because I went down and joined her for that. I speak a bit of French, you see, she's not quite so good at it, but so I went to do that for her, any opportunity for a free trip. And so we're standing out opposite. She wanted to go for a swim first thing in the morning. We'd got the keys the night before, and I said, don't you think you should buy a bed or something, you know, some beds or some... She said, no, we'll be fine sleeping on the parquet. And I said, oh, I don't know that we will. Anyway, halfway through the night, she said, that was a mistake. We should have bought beds. So the next day we did go and buy some beds. But she went out for a swim on this morning after the parquet. And then there was a television camera, you know, crew all out there on the prom. And I said, I wonder what they're all on about. And someone was holding this newspaper, and it said, Angelina Jolie has been admitted to the hospital to have her baby. And we were just right in front of this hospital coming off the beach. And they said, what do you think of the fact that Angelina Jolie is coming out of the sea? And so on her first day, she moved into the flat. There she is on television saying, oh, it's the most marvellous place. I'm so pleased she's picked someone so beautiful to have her babies.
Trying to pretend to be Ursula Andress coming out of the sea.
I think trying to pretend to be Julie Andrews from the accent.
Well,
anyway, it is the most gorgeous place.
She loves these, and I tell you, for writing, it is marvellous, because I've done a bit of writing down there as well. Some were quite different to England, because actually, when you're a woman on your own, when you're a woman who's not 20 with an enormous bust or something and blonde hair, if you go out for a drink in England, they say, oh, we've got this table. Oh, sorry, well, we're needing it later. Could you move? Oh, you don't mind sitting by the toilets, do you? You know, and it's horrible. And they sort of move you on, and then they treat you vilely. In France, the waiters come and flirt with you. They come and talk to you. You know, they ask you how you're getting on. They give you free crisps. They also give you free little bits of sort of nice, yummy things to eat, don't they? Pissaladier, you know, a local delicacy and things. So you've got that lovely carrot dangling. When I've done 1,000 words, I can go down and have a lovely drink, and a handsome waiter will come and talk to me.
But thank you ever so much for coming out on a Sunday evening. I'm absolutely thrilled that you all came, and we're both selling books outside if you fancy, and I'll sign them for you. And thank you so much.
Do you want to do your Denver Hall?
Oh, yeah. I've got one more thing to say. In England, there's a rather marvellous old people's home called Denville Hall. And as one ancient actress said to her friend just the other day, well, at least I'm not completely off my rocker, touch wood. Come in.
Thank you. Thank you. Celia and Fidelis will be signing to the right-hand side in the foyer. To the right-hand side.
Yeah, do we go straight away?
Go straight through.
Yeah.